Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only No BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Joining me today to share the 10 books that had the biggest impact on her life journey is internationally renowned medium, psychic, and medical intuitive Sherrie Dillard, who is the best-selling author of 11 books which have been translated into 15 languages. Sherrie Dillard has a Master's of Divinity in New Thought and Metaphysics, and she's been featured on national TV for her work with police detectives in solving the Stephanie Bennett cold murder case. Sherrie Dillard, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So tell me about your journey with books. I know that you said in your written description that at a very early age you knew that books were opening doors to whole new perspectives for you.
Oh, absolutely. I grew up in a home where we had a lot of the old classics. We had books that were probably above my reading level at the time, when I started when I was younger, but I soon learned how to negotiate that. And, like most kids, it just opened up so many new worlds for me. And I just spent a lot of time reading books.
You said that, books have been your teacher, your mentor, your friend, and sometimes your tormentor. How did they torment you?
When you read a really engaging book, and I tend to get very involved, even if sometimes if it's a nonfiction book, I can get very involved in it. When you're learning a lot from a book, or there's new insights or new ways to look at things. And the tormenting, there's different forms of tormenting I go through. But one form is when I realize that I'm almost done with it. I'm almost finished. And I start to slow down. I start to say, okay, well, I'm going to only read this much tonight. I'm not going to just go through it because I want to savor it. I want to wait for tomorrow. So I almost exert too much energy trying to keep it alive for me. And I'll miss out on really just the experience of it. So, maybe I'm tormenting myself, but that's one form. But there's definitely tormenting can come in different forms for me. Sometimes if it's a fiction book where, I'll expect certain things from certain characters. Sometimes I want them to go into more depth. Well, why did you make that decision? What is going on with you? And that will also, I want to know more about them. And sometimes the book will give it, but sometimes I have to just kind of make it work for myself but it's almost like a conversation that I want to have with that character.
Yeah.
And it's hard when you don't get that. Yeah.
Yeah. I sometimes don't like finishing a book because it's like saying goodbye to good friends.
Mm-hmm. It definitely is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how challenging or how easy was it for you to pick just 10?
What I do with books as I've gotten older, and I guess I'm more aware I'm doing this now. I think it's always been true, but I kind of let them pick me. And I didn't really try to pick the books. What I did was I kind of just gave this general idea message out there to, my books, to whatever this was about. And I said, come to me, let me know. I'll just get the title. I'll remember that book. And so it was fun for me. It was a lot of fun because I realized as I did the books and as they picked me, and I thought, where was that book? I can't remember. And I'd have to go and kind of rummage through things and try to find it. And it was a wonderful exercise. It actually really helped me so much too. To kind of pace my own growth with books and what I've learned from them, and to be able to kind of see myself somewhat detached from that at the same time, and to realize the importance that they had for me. It was just really, it was great exercise. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Everyone says that, everybody has like a life review. People say that, music, a song can take you back in time. But I think that's true of books too.
Mm-hmm.
You go back and you think, oh, yeah, I was at that stage of my life. Oh my God, I've grown a lot. So let's start with book number 1, which is The Unquiet Dead, A Psychologist Treats Spirit Possession by Edith Fiore, published in 1987.
Right.
Tell us how this book came to life.
That I went to a conference in Chicago, Illinois, and it was a spiritual hypnotherapy kind of, it had a lot of different things happening at it. And I wanted to take a couple workshops there. They were all closed. The only one that was open was a workshop about detaching from spirit attachments. It was about spirit attachments and how to release. And I thought, well, okay, I'll try it out. I'll just see what that's about. And it was just fascinating to me. The speaker was fascinating, and he talked about his work with detaching attached spirits from people. And one of the books he mentioned was that book, The Unquiet Dead, and how much it helped him. So before I left the conference, I actually got a private session from him too. And it was one of those things that I had never thought about. And it made such a difference. I could feel different. I really felt viscerally, emotionally, physically different when, after he had worked with me. So I got the book, which is an absolutely underread book. It was written by a psychologist, and her work kind of just inadvertently how this happened in her life, in her practice. And I started doing more of that in my own work. So it was definitely changed. It was definitely a book that just brought a whole new kind of reality to me that I would probably have never knew about if it wasn't a book I sought out in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was this before you became a medium?
At that time, well, see, I've always been a medium, although I didn't always call myself that, but I've always been aware of, just even at a young age, I would, at the time, it felt like imaginary people, it didn't really seem like when you're young, you just, yeah, okay. I could see, my mother would talk about her mother who had passed over, and I would basically see her mother, and she talked to me. So that the lines were blurred there. But then as I got older, it became more evident that no, this was someone, I really was talking to these spirits. So it was at the beginning of my practice, full time, working with communication with the other side, but it wasn't new to me in that way. Yeah.
Mm. Book number 2, Plant Spirit Medicine, The Healing Power of Plants by Elliot Cowan, published in 1991.
Okay, so that was another book where, I don't remember seeking that book out either. I think someone had recommended it to me, but it's a book that we talk a lot, we know a lot about, we've researched a lot about herbs and different plants and how they can help us to heal and certain ailments and things like that. There's science behind some of that. Some of that there's more, just tradition in that way of this is what this does. But this was the first time reading that book was very powerful because it was the first time that I had come into the awareness of how it's not just the composition of the plant or the herb that can heal in terms of, whatever effect the physical part of the plant has on our physical body. It was more about the spirit and how that spirit could actually heal us. And the idea of the book was about how certain plants that have a connection to us on a spiritual level, personal connection, can heal so many different things in our lives that may have nothing to do with the physical content of that herb or plant. And it was really about a spiritual connection and a communication with the plant. And that just gave me so much peace. That just felt so good to me, because I'm a real relationship person, but my relationships extend far beyond the physical, and that's fueled my work, as I love connecting with all different and communicating with all different, whether that's, people on the other side or higher divine beings or plants here or whatever it might be. So yeah, I just was really enthralled by that.
Book number 3, Grace and Mercy in Her Wild Hair, Selected Poems to the Mother Goddess by Ramprasad Sen, published in 1990.
How could you not read that book with a title like that? I remember seeing the title and thinking, oh my gosh, I thought I've got to read that book. It's such an amazing book. I can't even remember what century it is right now, but it was not recent. It was written quite a while ago. And it's poetry. It's this kind of like emotionally raw, passionate poetry to the mother goddess in this man who is in India, who is basically a civil servant. He doesn't have a lot of status. He's just a simple man, but his life is about his devotion and passion for the mother goddess. And he talks about how, the dark side of her too, the part of the mother goddess that brings him suffering and brings him torment. And it just opened that up for me. It just opened up, in our Western culture, our connection to spirit and to whether it's God or deities or mother goddess, whatever it may be, is very cerebral. It's very thought out, and it's kind of a neat little way we approach it. This was just wild abandon, he felt. It was just this emotionally just raw abandon, and it just allowed me to do more of that. It allowed me to just feel it at that deeper level, and that was a wonderful gift.
Mm-hmm. Book number 4 is Women of Wisdom by Saltrim Alioni, published in 1984.
That, how would I even describe that? I think in the descriptions I talked about what's so fascinating to me is our spiritual journeys, is our the journeys that we're on, especially as women. The feminine spirituality is so incredibly diverse and so individual and so passionate. And that's a book that helped me to really see the diversity and the attainment that women throughout the centuries have had in that mystics, as women who chose to live solitary lives to advance their spirituality, that became mystics, that became these women that didn't go by the traditions of the time either. They didn't, most of the women in that book never got married. They didn't have children. They were ostracized, not all of them, but some of them. They were thought of as, there was no real community for women mystics. There have been for men. There have been a lot for men as religious leaders and, or monks, either way. But for women, it's not been, I hadn't really known about women, not to the degree that this book talks about. This book is kind of the women in this book is just an amazing, the stories the lives they live, but the stories about their attainment and the levels of spiritual manifestations in their lives. It's just an incredible book. But yeah, it kind of opened that up more for me again. Is I hadn't really, we don't really, again, in Western culture, there's not a lot of women mystics that have been recorded throughout time. There are a few, but there's not a lot, not when we look at the men's leaders, Most of our teachings are from male leaders, and that's because there was tradition of recording them and honoring them, where it's not true for women. And in that book, someone did record that. Someone did go back and they looked at the stories and they traced their lives. And so it's a very rich book if anybody's interested in that, the lives of women mystics.
I've read some of her books. I really, really like her style of writing. It's so accessible as well. Book number 5, Love Poems from God, 12 Sacred Voices from the East and West, by various authors, translated by Daniel Ladinsky, published in 2002. Your nightly go-to, you said, for years.
Years and years, I still read it. It's so hard to put this in words. It's such an incredible diary almost of, I had, the people in the book are more well-known than the last one we talked about. In this book, we all know, we've heard of Saint Francis of Assisi, and we've heard of Saint Teresa, and we've heard of Meister Eckhart. These are people that we know. But what this book does, what their poetry does, is it gets much more personal than the public persona or the things we've read about them. Because I've read about all of the people in the book. I knew of everyone in the book before I read it, but I didn't really know anything about them until I read it. Because it's really more about what their personal experience is on a very real individual level, not as a saint, not as someone with authority, but just as a person who is, struggling in their own ways too, at times with their faith or what their experience is. I think I wrote this in my description that it's not really written for people to read. It's written really as a connection to God for them. They're speaking directly to God. I think almost all the poems in there are some exceptions, are written to God. Not that they say that, but yeah.
So we become, kind of like, somebody just looking over their shoulder and reading their work.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. So let's have a look. The next one is Medicine Woman by Lynn Andrews, published in 1981.
Yeah, Lynn Andrews. She wrote so much. It's a book that I was surprised I included, to be honest with you. Like I said, I let the books pick me. And I remember when I was really? Okay. All right. Lynn, she wrote so many books. And when I read her books, that I couldn't tell if it was fiction or nonfiction. I still don't know. I mean, there's obviously, I think it's a fiction book. I mean, I'm still struggling with that. But there was, again, with my fascination for women on spiritual journeys and mystics, women mystics and all. And it was a book that grounded me more in North American women mystics. A lot of the mystics that have been recorded are more Eastern. And she wrote more about a culture that felt more connected, because I live in the United States. So, and there is still not a lot, but there is still definitely Native American culture. And again, it's kind of a mystery. We still don't know anything about it. It's still something that I don't feel like there's a lot of trust in disclosing that, for good reason, from Native Americans. And it felt to me when I read that book that she had broken through that barrier some. And she seemed very courageous to write about it too, because she is a white woman, a Caucasian woman, who was living a very, just her life was a very non-Indigenous life. She lived in Beverly Hills, and was an art collector. So I know there's a lot of, after the books, were written, and there was a kind of a culture, a clash about, and a non-acceptance for her to write about this. And I understand that. I certainly do. I guess I wanted to honor, though, that I think that she was brave enough and courageous enough to break that barrier. And whether it's fiction or nonfiction, I don't think it really matters, because I feel like in the writing she did about the Native American women, the shamans, it was something to honor them. And that's what I came away with, was that honoring of them and their gifts and their journeys that have been not anything that we have really, we don't include that in anything, It's still something that is hidden from most of us about the Native American shamanic culture. And I don't blame them either. I mean, we would certainly blow it to pieces. So, but yeah, it was a book that I still struggle. I guess I still struggle with that a little bit too.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of talk these days about appropriation,
Right.
and a lot of people are vilified for it, which, I don't totally understand, because, I don't think most people, their intention is to appropriate, it's to understand. And sometimes you can't understand unless you experience. And, and why shouldn't we want to have an experience? I mean, how many people go to India and live on an ashram and live like an Indian woman would live, in order to reach whatever it is their goal is? So I just find that a little bit too precious, a little bit unnecessary to accuse people all the time of appropriation. And this is her story, and I think it's important for us to understand other cultures. I can understand why some cultures don't want to give their secrets away. Totally understand. But, in those that are happy to share it, then I think we should be allowed to share it too. Because how else are we ever going to understand each other?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I know, especially for Caucasian women, there's a lot of backlash for working as shamans.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if we believe that we have multiple lives, chances are we've all been something else.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I tell people too, is that,
That's
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Number 7. Edgar Casey, The Sleeping Prophet by Jess Stern. I remember reading this a long, long time ago.
You read that?
1960. Published. Yeah. I liked Jess Stern's work. He was a
Yeah,
really
I
good journalist.
agree. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, how could I not include Edgar Casey? The book, again, this is one of the reasons I so much love our spiritual journeys, is that he was such a simple man from Kentucky and worked as a photographer and was so religious, Bible religious. And here he was going into these deep unconscious trances and giving this incredible wisdom, incredible clairvoyant healings and wisdom. And there was so much that he shared about everything you can imagine, health and cultures and ancient cultures and the Akashic records and past lives, all the things that he in his religious town of Kentucky would never have ever believed.
Yeah.
I mean, really, I can't imagine what that was like for him. But he persisted, though. He persisted. He kept going. He had to confront so much in his life, I would think, given what he was talking about that was in conflict with his religious upbringing. But he, that's to me was as amazing as his story, was that he kept going. And he put out there for the times books that were really challenging. I mean, he wrote about Jesus's life in a way that was never recorded or never thought about in that way. And I agree, Jess did a very good job with describing that, just kind of really putting together a story that I think when you read it, it's one of those books, again, I think that it's the story, it has such an individual impact on people. It kind of challenges what we believe. It challenges our view. And I think everybody that reads that book will come away changed in that way, of some self-reflection, and even the judgments that we give to other people too, that we think, well, that's a Bible thumping person, or, they're religious, they're not spiritual, they're religious. And I know in my own practice, that's certainly been debunked, because I have many clients who are religious, but are also on a simultaneous spiritual journey too. I think that's challenging. It's an amazing book, and it certainly expanded my idea about who I was in that way, and a much more self-acceptance after I read it.
I always admire people like this, because, he's given so much information to the world that we wouldn't have had otherwise. I mean, he was going into all kinds of stuff, talking about, past lives, talking about reincarnation, talking about ancient, Atlantis and different things.
Oh.
How else are we going to get that information?
He even talked about what's going on now with the earth changes. He talked about the shift in the poles, what the weather, the impact on all of us in that way. Yeah. And I think he was the one that kind of opened up the whole, idea of Atlantis and what was really happening on Atlantis, what that was really about.
I don't remember him talking, I haven't read all the books, but about what's going on now. Did he give us any insights into
with the weather, with the earth changes? Yeah, he definitely talked a lot about that. He even came up with this whole map of what the parts of the United States that were going to change because of that. And how basically, I remember seeing this and reading this, that the map was almost like a lot of the states on the East Coast and Florida just were no longer, or they got very small, because he talked about the melting of, what's going on now, the icebergs and all that, and how that was going to cause all this flooding. And he showed the Mississippi River becoming so big that it actually made two different it separated the country. Yeah, I don't think he gave any specific guidance of it, other than certain places to live that would be safer.
Well, we'll see, won't we? Now, you're listening to a No BS Spiritual Book Club interview, and sharing her 10 best list of most inspirational books today is internationally renowned psychic, medium, medical intuitive teacher and author Sherrie Dillard. We'll be back with more from Sherrie Dillard after this break.
Welcome to Om Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Om Times Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com, click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene keys is basically the code book of life. In the gene keys, the book is made up of these three levels: shadows, gifts, and siddhis. And the journey is through those three levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the siddhi. And the siddhis are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Sherrie Dillard, book number 8, The Surrender Experiment, My Journey into Life's Perfection by Michael Singer, published in 2015. And I have to say that over the last 2 months, this book has been coming up again and again and again. And I don't know why, because usually it's his other book. Now suddenly everybody seems to be reading this one.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. I read it before I read his more, the book that he's more known for. But I like biographies. I like learning about people, so I thought I'd read that one. So many of us talk about, we struggle in our heads about, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. We overthink everything. We kind of, that constant mind chatter just goes and goes and goes. He truly is walking his talk, because that's what's so fascinating, I thought, about him was he talks in his book, what is it, Unleashing Your, I can't think of the name right now, the title of his other book, but the part of his teaching is about kind of not being in that chattering mind, not listening to, freeing ourselves from that. But he really did it he was so tested in that too. Things came up in his life that he just accepted and walked right into. He did so many different professions too, which was surprising to me. He felt like he was kind of, for whatever happened, sometimes it would circumstances change or synchronicities, or somebody would ask him to do something and he would be, okay, all right, I'll go do that now. And he did it. It was a great example of not allowing that chattering mind and that overthinking and that fear and stress and, oh my gosh, what's going to happen if I do that? And I can't do that. He didn't. He just walked right into it. And it was a very inspiring book in that way. Very inspiring, because it's easy to talk about, but it's so difficult to do that.
Yeah, that's what everybody says. I think we must be into some kind of energy where people are finally beginning to look at how they can do these things that we think are impossible.
Yeah, he's a great example for that.
So book number 9, Kuan Yin Chronicles, The Myths and Prophecies of the Chinese Goddess of Compassion, by Martin Palmer, J. Ramsey, and Man Ho Kwok, published in 1995.
Yes, that is, the book has, I think it's 3 different kind of sections in it that talk about the history of Kuan Yin, in terms of the different Asia, the different, depending on the culture, the different ways that she has manifested in people's lives and the way they view her. And then they talk about, there's a section about her influence too on the cultures in those ways and how she is the most revered feminine female, saint, deity in Asia. However, my favorite section was the last section, which is actually an oracle. And it's an oracle that I'm going to over describe it, but just so you'll know what I'm talking about. There's, you open it, that last section, there's 2 pages with numbers on them with little circles around them. And the idea is you kind of close your eyes and you just let your finger take you to the number that you're meant to read at that time. So you do that. And then let's say you get number 17. Poem, her poem, which is, it has a name, but it's number 17. And then it's just a short little paragraph, just this little poem about different things, but it's one of the best oracles I've ever used. I just love it. They're written as poems, so they're not, go do this or that, or this is what's going on in your life. But they're very wise. They're these poems of wisdom about, they talk about different manifestations that we may see here with the earth or with animals or even, culture with people, things like that. Whatever it might be, there's different topics that the poems are about. But I've gotten, every time I do that oracle, and I don't do it a lot, it's one of those things that torments me because I'd love to read them all and just do it over and over, but I don't, because I want to keep it something that's very pure. I don't want to let it get in my head too much. So I only use it randomly, and I use it in a way that I really revere what I read. I take it to heart. I sit with it. I meditate what I read. And I've gotten so much from that book. It's such an incredibly rich book. The Oracle is just wonderful to me.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that one out. So, book number 10, the I Ching, the Book of Changes. Right. So many different versions, but the one that you chose was the one by Richard Wilhelm. There's many other names that are mentioned here, and also has a foreword by Carl Jung.
Right. I think a lot of people are familiar with the I Ching. The only downside of that translation is that it's all male oriented. It's he. But other than that, it's my favorite translation. I think it's because it was the one I started with when I was very young. I was a teenager and I had a very, very difficult childhood, a very dysfunctional family. And I feel like sometimes the book raised me. You know that? I feel like it was like, I depended on that book for years of my life to help me get through things, to give me some guidance to what is going on here in the way that, they talk about crossing the great water a lot in the different hexagrams, or they talk about what the superior person would do. The language is certainly something that can be, kind of challenging or very male oriented, but it's clear in that way. It's pretty clear once you get used to the language and used to understanding, what they're talking about. It's very clear as to some of, can really serve for choices for what do I do here. I'll give you an example. In my bio, I worked on the Stephanie Bennett. I work with detectives. They asked me to help them to solve this cold case. One of the things they told me before we started was that, well, there's a $10,000 reward for apprehending this person. And actually that went to $15,000 by the time we were done the case. And I'll make a long story short, but basically they refused. They were not going to give me the reward unless I took them to court, which I could have won because I had evidence. I saved everything on email. I made them email me everything just to show how influential I was, identifying the murderer. Anyway, what does that have to do with the I Ching? I remember doing the I Ching when that happened, when it was pretty clear that they didn't want to. I'm in North Carolina in the United States, which is a very conservative red state. They would have never agreed to admitting that I helped them. So anyway, I read the I Ching book. I threw the hexagram and it said, I forget the exact verse, but basically it said don't take the money. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go. There's nothing in that for you. Nothing. I let it go. I completely dropped it. I did no more interviews. I had so many people wanted to interview me. I had shows that wanted me to be on, and I did nothing after that. I let it all go after reading that hexagram. So how
did they come to choose you? Do you mean if they didn't want people to know, that somebody was helping them, how did they find you? Why did they choose you? I mean, it sounds like they probably weren't even believers in what you could do.
Well, I know that's what amazed me was that they did call me because I did not call them. What happened was that I was working at a bookstore giving readings about once a month or something just to get out of the house. Well, one woman came in because that was in Raleigh where the murder took place. And a woman came in, she asked me about the murder. No one had ever asked me about it. She did because she lived in the same apartment complex and she knew the killer had never been caught. And she was a single woman. She identified with Stephanie and she was really, frightened a lot of the time. So she asked me, will they ever catch him? Can you tell me anything about it? So I just did the reading and I just told her what I was getting. And she said, well, you have to go tell the police that. I said, they're not going to believe me. I'm not going to go to the police with this. I'm not going to do that. I just was not going to do that. And so she said, well, okay. Well, I think she called them because when they called me, they said that they had gotten a tip on their tip line that I had information. So that's how it happened.
But you identified the murderer.
It's a long story. I'm writing a book about it now because it's a story that is kind of hard to believe how it came about, how I found out. But yeah, it was a long time ago. I just never wrote about it either. Like I said, I never talked about it. And then it's only been recently that I felt like I've got to write. I felt very pushed to write about it because I think it's a story that goes beyond. It's not about me in that way that I did this amazing thing. It's really about what was working through me and set me up to identify it because it really came about that way. It was really something moving through me that I don't take credit for. And that's why I'm writing the book.
They prosecuted the person and...
Well, what's surprising is that they arrested him. They found his DNA that he was definitely 100% matched the DNA that they had. That his DNA was not in the DNA bank or whatever. So, until they got it on a straw, actually. They followed him and they got it off a straw of his. And then they went in his apartment and they found evidence. He had saved things from her room. He had broken into her apartment. He had actually committed another murder, which I told them that he had killed before. He was planning another one. He was a serial killer. And this is what happened. They put him in jail, waiting trial. I think it was like the second day he was in jail, he hung himself. He committed suicide in jail. Yeah. Which didn't surprise me. And again, you'll have to read the book because that didn't surprise me given how I found him, given how it came about that, yeah, he was identified anyway. But the I Ching.
Okay. We've done your 10 books now, so I want to know a little bit about your books. I mean, I think your latest book is Raise Your Frequency and Manifest Abundance, a guide for empaths, intuitives, and sensitives.
That's the one. Yeah, that one was just published. It's a really different book for me because a lot of my books have had to do with, not all of them, but at least half of them maybe, have been about working with intuition as a tool to receive more energy information. And this book is really about using that same faculty as an empath or an intuitive or highly sensitive person, but to use that faculty not to gain information or to know things about finances or relationships or anything like that. But it's really about how to use that channel we have to raise our frequency to higher dimension, higher, a little bit out of this third dimension, fourth dimension, fifth dimension, and to live at that higher frequency where we are not bound to the dictates of physicality. And when we're in that higher level, when we're in that higher frequency, there's no opposition. I go through this in the book about our levels of consciousness. In our third dimensional level of consciousness, we're just ruled by duality. There's right and wrong, bad and good, loss and gain. It's all about duality. We go forward, we go back. When we raise our frequency to higher levels of consciousness, there's no opposition any longer. There's no force that is moving us into resistance or into an opposing state of being. It's just that's all that exists in that level. So when we're in that higher frequency, even if it's for a moment, I mean, that's what I tell people. We don't have to live there. We can't live there all the time in a physical body. It's kind of just not going to happen. At least, I mean, it can happen. There are certain mystics that have allowed that to happen. So it's not impossible. But even if we're only there for a very limited amount of time and space, it has this amazing effect on our well-being, our peace of mind, our ability to receive our highest good. And that's what this book is about, is living in a way and using that natural channel that highly sensitive empaths and intuitives have to open up to energy. It actually, it's a little easier for us because of that.
You also wrote, I'm Still With You, Communicate, Heal and Hold with Your Loved One on the Other Side. Is that a book that is going to help people make contact with their loved ones? Become their own medium?
Yeah, absolutely. I had written a book a few years back more about mediums, I think the book is called, it's You Are a Medium. And it was a book about how to connect with those on the other side. This book, it's about I'm Still With You. It's more about our personal journey with that. It's more about how do we connect with our loved ones? How do we continue our relationship with them? How do we continue to evolve and grow? How can we bring peace to our relationship with them if it was fraught with challenges? The idea behind the book is really about our journey does not end with our loved ones once they pass over. In fact, it can't continue at a higher level. So the exercises, the meditations, the things I help people with is how to not so much work as a medium to connect in that way, but to work in a deeper spiritual way with their loved ones. And so it's an easier book in some ways to connect, because I come up with exercises, or they've been given to me, that, we make it more complicated than it needs to be. It's simpler than we think too, and they're closer to us than we know, and they hear us more than we realize, and they impact us and we impact them still. So there is a relationship already going on. We don't have to try to make that happen. The book is really about helping us to be aware it is happening and to be more present and engaged with that. Yeah.
I was looking at your website yesterday, and I had a look at your video, one of your videos. Why did many psychics get the election outcome wrong? Do you want to share that answer with us?
Well, say that. I'm sorry, I missed. What was
the video on your blog? Was why did many psychics get the election outcome
I thought
wrong?
that's the one you said. I just want to be sure. Okay. Boy, did I receive a lot of backlash for that. Did you read the comments? I mean, they were like going at me for that one. I have never received so much backlash from a video as I got with that one, which makes me laugh. As you see, it doesn't bother me. I'm like, I think, part of the reason I actually made it to help people. I made it to help psychics to realize, because that's what I do. Most of my books are people read them, because they want to get better at this. You're in UK, correct? Yeah. Well, in the States with this election, it was amazing to me how I don't know of any psychics that predicted Trump would win. Almost all of them predicted Harris would win. And I can understand why. It was, close, and we all wanted her. We didn't obviously all want, but most, sane people and receive more backlash now. But so what happened was, it's not complicated what happened. I've been there. Psychics said what people wanted to hear, basically. It's not that complicated. To really be good at this, to really, really be good at this, you've got to see things and know things you don't want to see and know. Truly. If you're going to be accurate, you have to open up the full blank slate of all possibilities. And even if the last thing you want is for that to happen, you're not really giving other people the information they need if you're only speaking to what they want to hear. And that's why I received so much backlash from psychics, because of course they didn't want to hear that from me. But I've been there. I didn't use it as an insult. I just used it as a way of, that's what we got to do though.
Yeah. So did you predict one way or the other?
Well, I knew Trump was going to win. I don't do my yearly predictions anymore, though. For this reason is because I predicted COVID. Well, I didn't call it COVID. I predicted that year that we would have a virus bacteria that was going to be very serious, and that was going to be, just really deadly, basically. But it was really hard. And, the thing was, when I predicted that, when I wrote out my predictions, I didn't pay that much attention to it. No one else did either. It was just like, it wasn't truly believed. It was just like, oh yeah, okay, all right. And then when it happened, I'm like, wow, that's bigger than I thought it was going to be. Or I said it was going to be big, but I guess I just wasn't really feeling it that way. But I remember when I did that, when I felt it, I think part of the reason I didn't think it was going to be that big was because I didn't like the feeling of that. It was kind of like when I did the Stephanie Bennett thing. The hardest part was, and this is another reason I'm writing the book, do you know how hard it is to feel a serial killer's energy?
I'm sure.
It was incredibly, it almost broke up my marriage at the time. It was like I was living in this darkness day and night of this went on for 3 weeks. I worked with them. Actually, I think it was a month. It was hard to live with that energy. And honestly, I knew Trump was going to win, but I kept holding out the idea that maybe I was wrong, and hoping I was wrong. And Here we are.
Well, you pleased half
And
the
I'll
population.
be serious. I'll be, and the thing about right now going into the future, at least in the States, it's going to get really bad.
Is that a prediction?
Yeah. I mean,
For
I
how
think
long?
we all know that. I don't think you need to be predictive to know that. I think anybody living here in their right mind knows it. But yeah,
Yeah.
we
how
all want to
long?
move to the UK now.
Don't worry about we're in our own problems, and honestly, you look around the world, I don't think there's a country that isn't having
I
problems
agree.
right now.
I agree. I think it's
We're in transition, and it's going to happen.
gosh, we are. I guess things have to get really, really, I think it does. I think that's why this is happening. It's just having, unfortunately, it's still that third dimension we learn through suffering. We haven't learned how to learn through joy. We only learn how, not all of us, but that's still a predominant consciousness. Suffer
Well,
and you open.
we're here for experience.
Right.
That's it.
And we're getting our fill, aren't we?
And when you have experiences, the worst thing that can happen is you learn what you don't want. That's it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. That's a big way we learn, but by what we don't want. Yeah.
Sherrie Dillard, we're out of time now. Thank you so much for adding your 10 best spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations.
Thank you so much for having me and for allowing me to do that exercise. It was great fun.
Good. I'm glad.
Mm-hmm.
So for more information about Sherrie Dillard's work, go visit her website at Sherrie, SHERRIE, Dillard.com. That's it for this week. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me. Thanks again, Sherrie Dillard.
Thank you so much.